we wanted to talk about Kemi Badenoch on this and her maternity leave. I don't fully understand the maternity leave situation. Thinks it's too friendly, too kind.
Yeah, it's a weird one because I have the quote here. It's really funny because at the same time it sounded like she was trying to say that we have too much maternity leave, but then also said she didn't want to change it. So she says we need to have more personal responsibility. There was a time when there wasn't any maternity pay and people were having more babies. One of the problems we have right now is that there is too much government getting involved in everything. People aren't happy with what the government does at the moment. Asking the government to do more is not the answer. The exact amount of maternity pay, in my view, is neither here nor there. We need to make sure that people are creating an environment where people can work and people can have more freedom to make their individual decisions. It kind of sounds like to me that she would get rid of the right to maternity pay and just leave it up to individuals. It's getting back into that individualism argument that like people like Truss was massively into as well. But I didn't really see Kemi coming there, but I guess so.
I mean, I thought she was a no-nonsense, non-bullshitter. Why is she signaling that she thinks maternity pay has gone too far? But then she's like, well, it's neither here nor there. Just say that you want to reduce it or get rid of it. I mean, I thought you were a no-nonsense politician, but she clearly hasn't. Now, I mean, the crazy thing she said was there was a time when people had personal responsibility and birthing rates were higher. I mean, first of all, she's not really cited any specific statistic or time frame. So all we can do is really guess what she's talking about here. And my guess is she's probably talking about the bloody 50s and 60s when one household could live on one income. So of course, if let's talk about a traditional family, because let's be honest, that's what she's alluding to here, isn't she? A traditional family, all right, the man goes out to work and gets paid enough to look after the family, and his wife doesn't go to work, right? That's not the reality we live in now, though. People have to work, like couples, both of them have to work full time just to keep a roof over their heads. So taking away maternity leave and all these other social security and safety nets doesn't mean that it falls on personal responsibility. It pushes people into poverty. What she's speaking to here is she's making a moral argument. She's saying that the government shouldn't have to step in. And the reason why is because of the moral degeneracy of society, and that's why it's happened. She doesn't understand the material aspect here. And the reason why she doesn't understand the material aspect is because she also said that, well, I worked at McDonald's and then I became working class. Now, now what an insane thing to say. Now, of course, she was born in a middle class, had a middle class background. Her parents were doing all right. Now, had she moved out and her parents gave her no financial backing or anything to help her out, and she worked at McDonald's full time and she's paying rent, then she would be right. She would be working class. But I suspect that's not what she was talking about. She was probably saying, well, I had a Saturday job, right, at McDonald's, and as soon as I went through the doors, I'm suddenly working class. This is someone who doesn't understand the material reality. And it's also very funny that conservatives say that they're the party of family. Well, there's nothing more anti-family than taking away the policies that help families grow. And another one is the 2-child benefit cap. I know that's under the Labour Party now, but it was the Conservatives who brought it in. That's an anti-family policy. People aren't going to have kids. That's why birthing rates are down, because people can't afford it. It's very, very simple. But Kemi Badenoch either does know this and doesn't give a shit, or she doesn't understand, and she thinks we don't need to spend money on things such as maternity pay. We just need to morally go back to what we were in the 40s, 50s, and 60s without understanding the economic circumstances, what led to that sort of family lifestyle to what we have today. Now, no one's suggesting that we should go back to the past where men work and women stay home. No, but I do also think it's a problem that the average family back in those days could support themselves on one income, and now it takes multiple. I do think that's a failure, but I don't think it's a moral failure. I think it's the economic system that we've inherited, which Kemi Badenoch, once again, does not understand.
What we turn into one of those countries like America, right? So if you look at a lot of middle-class American jobs that pay quite well, they actually have somewhat better maternity pay than what the state would require them to do, because those middle-class companies want to be competitive, so they retain talent. But the issue is in America, because there's I think it's literally like 2 weeks minimum, I think, by federal law. Anyone in the comments, feel free to correct me, that you get a lot of working-class people who basically have zero maternity pay. And that's what would happen down this. I can't imagine that if Kemi Badenoch, came PM and got rid of maternity pay, I imagine that actually most companies would still keep it, but eventually it would slowly strip away. And a lot of those organizations who hire people in working class positions wouldn't pay maternity leave. And we'd have this even bigger gap between people who have middle class jobs and people who are working on, 0-hour contracts, access to zero maternity pay, maybe a minimum of 2 weeks like America, because they're such an inspiration for workers' rights. This is what it turned into. I'm fed up of this like libertarian view on certain things, and this is what it is, right? It's down to the individual. You can take care of it. Don't have a baby if you can't afford it. Save up for your own maternity pay is basically what she's saying.
Yeah. And it's also the constant double standard. It's like the whole thing of being anti-abortion but then also anti-sexual health, sexual education, and then also once baby's born, anti-support for the baby. Like it's completely hypocritical. It's just virtue signaling. Like mat leave in the UK is £184 a week after the first 6 weeks. If you're with a partner as well. And it's pretty hefty, especially when childcare is massive. Childcare has gone up, like it's more than like tripled in the last few years in terms of cost. Mortgage prices rent prices as a part of your income has become a massive, like the idea that we used to live in a situation where there were families where one parent didn't work. Nowadays, if one person doesn't work in a relationship, like that's considered kind of crazy, like having someone be a stay-at-home parent, because we don't have time for it. We also don't have the community that we used to have where families would live nearby to each other and they'd all support each other and like do the childcare as like a family thing. It just feels like a random thing to fire out into the world. Like, oh, I haven't said anything mean recently. I'm just going to chuck this out there.
It shows that she's not a good political operator as well, right? There are actually many easier arguments to make in favor of libertarianism, although I think it's a stupid ideology, right? But there's other things you could go after. But going after something so popular like mat leave, I mean, no one is saying we should get rid of mat leave. So to randomly bring that up just shows she's out of touch, and she doesn't have any political nous.
It just feels like throwing a culture war out there to be like
throwing a culture war, which is, I mean, that is the modus operandi of the right, though, isn't it? They just throw culture wars out there. But like some things are untouchable right now. So to just throw that out there just shows that she has no clue, and she's a gift to the Labour Party. I mean, she's not gonna. I mean, the Tories aren't going to win the next election, I don't think, anyway. But having someone in charge like that, they're toast, absolutely toast. And to go back to what you were alluding to, Sneakcret, it's out of the Republican handbook. It's we care about life when it comes to abortion, right? But once they're born, fuck them. All right, we'll send them to war, and when they come back, they'll be homeless. Prison.
If you're homeless,
social security. Even before that, though, it's like, right, okay, well, we don't want abortions, but we're also not going to give sex ed to kids, so they're not going to practice safe sex. They're not going to understand about contraceptives. So what you're actually doing is you're increasing people giving birth when they're younger, right? Which obviously leads to more regretful. Well, it would lead to more abortions because they regret it, but also not giving the social security on top of that. It's a horrible political worldview. It's basically burning. What's that term when you call it? Burning at both ends.
Burning the candle at both ends.
Burning the candle at both ends. You're giving these people no chance in life. It's a horrible thing, and I think that's conservatism in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it was also Biden in America as well after the pandemic, and he came in. He passed whatever the name of the act was, I don't know, but they had child tax credit, right? So all organizations said that literally took almost most children in America who were in poverty out of technical poverty, and it was the Republicans who then, when it came for renewal, voted against it. And it's because Republicans in America, the conservatives, all have that kind of libertarian flair, right? The idea of like people should just be able to take care of their own families. And I've seen a little bit of a rise of like that kind of American libertarianism in the UK. Obviously, I think Liz Truss was probably the perfect example of that. That's why she's spending so much time in America. But I'm kind of scared of that type of conservatism for the future. I really hope we don't go down that American libertarian route, because I feel like that individualism kind of approach would be quite scary for the UK in the future.
That funding is coming here, though, isn't it? That's what, like, the Alliance Defending Freedom, the anti-abortion group that also want to sterilize trans people. They're in the US heavily, and they're expanding into Europe and the UK now as well. They always say it's libertarianism, but then when it comes to like state control of like prisons, they're like, oh no, prison, we need loads of prison. That's fine. It's just when it comes to healthcare that we don't want it to be our problem.
I was thinking about libertarian the other day, right? And it's very funny, right? That the two public services that they support is policing and the military. But why is that? Like, just think about it. So you want to strip it down to its core. Why is it policing and military are the only public services that libertarians support? Why don't they support healthcare? Why is that? Why is healthcare government overreach, but the military or the police isn't, despite the fact that the police are heavily militarized, and also they are very invasive to your personal rights. When it comes to the military, they're also, they're imperialist abroad. So it's these two things, and the reason why is because at the end of the day, you strip it back to its core, libertarianism is just basic right. They're just basic right wingers. A lot of them, again, I know that word gets thrown around, fascist, but you scratch one, you seem to find it. Now, why isn't healthcare the number one thing? And even if you were to try and follow the logic somehow, you could say, well, okay, well, in order to have a police force, you also need people to do the job. They need to be healthy. So surely access to healthcare is the priority here. I don't think. I mean, they don't think that hard, do they, libertarians? But it's very funny that it's policing and military. They're the only things they support. Any other public service? It's government control.
Yeah.
We
I will.
have the worst police as well.
We have. There's an interesting. There was a. Do you remember during Black Lives Matter when Palestinians were giving advice to Black Lives Matter protesters, because a lot of the tear gas that was being used against BLM protesters was the same stuff that was used against Palestinians by the IDF, because the IDF trained the US police, don't they, as well. But there was actually, on the healthcare thing, I saw something the other day. They were talking about the idea that actually healthcare is weaponized in the US and in the UK in the same as a similar, only when it's like an element of control. And they were talking about the whole thing of people being sectioned, or pushed, or like given, kind of declared like mentally unsound on their own, and how it can be weaponized in the US and in the UK. And it was one of those, it was really interesting. It was very, very nuanced. So I need to find it and like share it on TikTok or something. But it was essentially like there have been loads of different cases of, I think a police officer had assaulted his girlfriend. And in order to prevent her being able to make a statement against him, he got her like 5220, 220, 2120, the US version of sectioning someone, basically. 5150'd. He got her 5150'd, so she was mentally unsound. So she then wasn't able to bring charges against him. And there's a lot of cases of this in the US, especially when it comes to poor people, especially when it comes to POC. Declaring people mentally unfit is something that will be looked at in your criminal record for the rest of your life. It'll be considered when you're being sentenced on different things. If you've got a history of mental illness and the way that it's used, that kind of stigma against it is a place where the government will step in on the kind of controlling element as well. So it's like, even in healthcare, the times that it's provided is typically as a form of like weaponizing people, and it's not really focusing on actually safeguarding anyone. But I thought it was an interesting thing that I heard about.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, there's such a pervasive issue when it comes to sexual assault within the police force here in America. Obviously, we've had many recent instances of rape, of sexual assault, abuse of women. That is being used by the powers throughout the Met because they can get away with it, and obviously it happens worldwide. It's not something I'm particularly qualified to talk about, but I'm shocked nonetheless.
Well, I will. I'll you go ahead, Charlotte.
No, you go.
Oh no, I was going to bring it back to Kemi for a second, but if you wanted to say
bring it back to
anything
Kemi. No, bring it back to Kemi, because I think we need to talk about our liberals argument as well before we get to the end.
No, I heard as well. I haven't looked into this, but I was listening to it on a podcast today about how when Kemi was doing door stopping, she's obviously there's the controversy around her saying that we need to allow the right type of cultures as well into the UK. Did you hear about this? And she specifically cited how she was knocking on doors during the campaign and came across a woman who said that she couldn't speak to her and she had to get her husband, which I don't even know if I believe, because Kemi has actually been caught lying before. I don't know if you remember, about 2 years ago, she was in Parliament saying that while she's been making these laws around LGBTQ stuff, because she was her official title? The Minister for like Women Inequalities, was it? I think. She said that she was consulting LGBTQ companies, and I think it was one of the like Pink News or something like that did like a Freedom of Information Act and found out that her department haven't contacted a single LGBTQ organization. So, and she's been caught lying a couple of times in the past. So when she cites these random sources of, oh, a woman refused to speak to her because she had to get her husband, I just can't believe her. I just don't believe anything she says when she makes up these random stories.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.